Our desert communities are celebrating the announcement by President Obama on February 11th of this year. He designated the Mojave Trails, Sand to Snow, and the Castle Mountains as national monuments. You've seen that on our screen as you came in. Today, we're so pleased that Jack Thompson will offer a brief history of California desert conservation, as well as what these beautiful new monuments offer and how you can find them. Jack is the co-founder and manager of the Wildlands Conservancy's Whitewater Preserve. If you've ever been out there, it's just absolutely magnificent. He is also the Wildland Conservancy's Desert Preserves director and serves as its staff photographer. He has been a conservationist, a ranger, a professional outdoor photographer in the Coachella Valley for the past 9 years. Please join me in giving Jack Thompson a Rancho Mirage welcome.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for being here. It's an honor to be a representative of this amazing time that we're in. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, that wasn't covered perhaps all the way in the introduction, I was part of a small team of people that helped to found the Whitewater Preserve and Whitewater Canyon, and that now serves as one of the main portals into the Sand to Snow National Monument. I currently oversee about roughly 30,000 acres of conservation lands that are in our local area. This picture behind us is a view of Whitewater Canyon, looking right across the San Andreas Fault boundary at Bonnie Bell, and looking back into what is now the Sand to Snow National Monument. So the kind of work I do as a nonprofit conservationist is pretty diverse. It was a very hands-on process to decommission the trout hatchery and then begin the process of inviting the community in to the San Gorgonio Wilderness, which had some access issues over time. And this kind of work puts us in cooperation with a lot of different major environmental organizations in the United States, other federal land management agencies like the Bureau of Land Management, the Forest Service, and the Fish and Wildlife Service. One of the things that I wanted to say up front in this talk was that this experience of working kind of in tandem with federal land managers and local conservationists has really underscored the process of local involvement. And from that perspective, I can say that without a doubt, our newest national monuments could not have happened without the tireless work of inspired people. And while I want to thank every one of them, especially some of those people that might be in this room right now, their contributions are far too great to catalog here, and they span decades of work, and I could not presume to speak for them or their achievements and the contributions to what is likely one of the greatest victories for desert conservation many of us will see in our lifetimes. So together, Sand to Snow and Mojave Trails comprise roughly 1.8 million acres of federally protected lands. Most of us are going to be more familiar with the lands that are inside Sand to Snow. So when you walk out of the library today, if you look over to your right, on the horizon you're going to see what's the heart of the Sand to Snow National Monument. You're going to see the timbered ridges and mountaintops that really kind of define what the local experience of the monument is. So this view is an aerial view of the Whitewater Canyon drainage. Boy, there's a lot of light spilling in on this. I don't remember it being quite this light in here before. Is there any way we can make it darker? Is this really all we got? Okay, I guess that's the best of it. So sorry about that, guys. So what we're looking at right here is, have any been to the Whitewater Preserve? Here is the ranger station kind of area right here, and the rest of this is what you see on the northwestern horizon, which is Mount San Gorgonio, and this is the Whitewater drainage. So what largely makes up the Sand to Snow National Monument was, or currently is still also the San Gorgonio Wilderness. And the San Gorgonio Wilderness really encompasses one of the most biologically diverse mountain ranges in North America. The ecology there is influenced from the convergence of three really distinct ecosystems. There's the coastal influence to the west, there's the Mojave Desert to the east, and then there's the Sonoran Desert to the south. Which is a really special thing for people, because then on a single outing, you can see a lot of really diverse things. You know, you might see something like a bighorn sheep, things that you associate with the desert, like desert tortoise, and then you might also see something that you would expect really to be in the mountains, like a black bear or a golden eagle. The landscape around us has really been shaped by very dramatic historical events, millions and millions of years of glacial expansion and recession. San Gorgonio was once also the southern extent of the last glacial maximum, which is a time about 25,000 years ago when much of the Earth was covered with vast sheets of ice. And the effects of those glaciers depositing roughly 1,600 plant species in this region causes some to believe that the Sand to Snow National Monument is one of the most botanically rich national monuments in the United States. Kind of a satellite piece of the Sand to Snow National Monument is Flat Top Mesa and Black Lava Butte, which are these features that are just outside of Pioneer Town and the Wildlands Conservancy's Pioneer Town Mountains Preserve. These buttes have a record of human settlement that dates back several thousand years, settlements that include the Serrano people who lived here before the Spanish mission period. Now, at this point, we have an opportunity to look at some important questions related to the monuments. So given this kind of tremendous natural resource that we've just kind of talked about, with this much land previously being designated as wilderness, many of us still kind of wonder why does it need to be a national monument? Wilderness designations are a very durable form of conservation, and they kind of make up a real strong ideal of kind of the American space that's protected for our national treasures and comprise a lot of the land that our public outdoor recreation takes place on. So why national monuments? So the Wilderness Act created part of what we know as the San Gorgonio Wilderness in 1964, and then the boundary was expanded pretty significantly in the 1994 Desert Protection Act. So to really get an understanding of that, we have to take a few steps back and see what the reality of these conservation lands really looks like. So this map here shows us the conservation lands that were drawn in Senator Feinstein's California Desert Protection Act of 1994. So each one of these light green spaces represents a federally designated wilderness. So there we are down here with the San Gorgonio Wilderness. All these other areas here are also wilderness. The act also created Joshua Tree National Park, Mojave National Preserve, and off the map to the north, Death Valley. And so all in all, that protected 7.6 million acres of land across Southern California. So massive, massive conservation for the California desert. And if anybody's really interested about how that came to pass, the definitive book on that is Frank Wheat's California Desert Miracle. And it's what will really kind of give you the in-depth history of how this came to be. So there's 69 wilderness areas here that were created in that act. But there's a lot of things that this map doesn't show. So what all of these red squares represent are private lands that were inside these conservation areas that could never be designated in the same way and the same protections. And so what you're looking at here is Route 66, and this is also the historic railroad corridor. And so as an incentive for the railroads to push west during the Great Western Expansion in the 1800s, the federal government gifted the railroads every other square mile of land and a 25-mile north and south swath along their rail line. So what you end up with is this checkerboard that's 50 miles wide as it comes across the west. And so when these lands were designated for conservation in Congress, all of these lands sat inside of those conservation designations and couldn't be protected in the same way. That means that there are, I think, roughly 80,000 acres inside Mojave National Preserve, 20,000 acres inside Joshua Tree National Park, and many tens of thousands spread out through all of these wilderness areas, including the San Gorgonio Wilderness. So if you look back down to the San Gorgonio Wilderness where we are, you can see that right in the heart of it are all of these private lands. And what's implied with all this private land ownership is that the private landowners are free to develop them at will. So if you were ever to go visit this landscape and take a look at it, you could imagine how different it would look if all these lands were sold and developers were free to mine or explore other natural resources if that was their desire. So what to do? What to do about this? From the perspective of landscape connectivity, this is also a pretty bad thing. One kind of example for us locally is you can see that to the north of the San Gorgonio Wilderness here are other wilderness areas like the Bighorn Mountains Wilderness, and right in the path of it is this huge piece of property here, roughly 25,000 acres, that's private. So one of the things that scientists have now, is very entrenched in their thinking is that to maintain healthy ecological conditions inside protected land, they have to have corridors so that life can move between them. If you cut them off, they kind of start to exist as little islands, and genetic diversity goes down, and it's a real problem. So from a landscape connectivity problem, this all was kind of laying here like a ticking time bomb. And there was no real way to get around it from a public lands acquisition point of view, because as you can see, it's massive, and this represents a huge, huge challenge. Another part of that kind of issue that comes up is for public access. And a really good example of some of the public access issues that you can have are that if you're a resident of the Coachella Valley and you want to get into the San Gorgonio Wilderness, one of the easy pathways is right up Whitewater Canyon, where there's a county road. Here's Whitewater Canyon, and at the very end of it, you run into private property that's the perfect gatekeeper into the wilderness. And so in our situation, this private property was owned for roughly 70 years by the Whitewater Trout Company, and their business operations really precluded them having this place be an active portal into the wilderness. So the public was kind of in a sticky place, because if you stepped through right off of the county road, you were now on their property, and if they did not wish you to be there, you were trespassing. And to kind of understand a little bit the gravity of what that looks like, we can look at this aerial view again, where you can imagine, so here's the county road coming right up to the private property, and then all of the land that's around here is our public lands. And that was not an uncommon thing for people to buy, especially along the west, where these railroad pieces would be carved up into subdivisions for very great access points to be purchased and then kind of blocked for the general public. And this was kind of a classic example of that was obviously not the intention of the property owner, just kind of a natural consequence of their position on the landscape there. So what to do? So local conservationists and the organization that I work for, the Wildlands Conservancy, set about looking at what they could do to make some changes to this. And one of the changes that they decided to do was to go back and see what properties they could purchase and hold open for the public for conservation. So they purchased this 25,000 acres just north on the northeast side of the San Gorgonio Wilderness, and that has now become the Pioneer Towns Mountains Preserve. So that's now open to the public every day for hiking and kind of more passive outdoor recreation like birding, backpacking, things like that. So this condition sat this way for quite a long time, and nobody really knew what to do with it because it was such a daunting task. But then finally in the late 90s, the condition that I think everybody feared the most started to come to pass, where the railroad companies decided that they were going to liquidate these lands and put them up for sale. So signs started to pop up in the Mojave Desert that said, "For sale, for development," which was a really terrifying thing for the people who really love this landscape. So that really forced the issue in a really big way. The Wildlands Conservancy with their partners worked to raise $30 million to contribute to $15 million grant monies coming from the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and ultimately purchased 587,000 acres of these railroad lands. They then took these donated lands and they gifted them back to the American people in what is the largest conservation land gift to the American people in US history. So this map became this map. Yay. So, in a lot of ways, seemed like we were in a good way, right? A lot of people's worst fears kind of got unplugged right then. We can take a look at the San Gorgonio Wilderness and see all those private inholdings are now for conservation, many of them donated back to their federal land managers. And all these lands donated back to the public interest so that we, the people, can have a say in what happens to them. We set about at this time then to really try to deal with the public access issues that were facing us for people trying to get into the San Gorgonio Wilderness, where local conservationists knew that it would be an amazing opportunity for the community to get into the San Gorgonio Wilderness through Whitewater Canyon when finally the historic trout hatchery went up for sale. So we set to work to decommission the hatchery, and now it's open to the public, like the Pioneer Towns Mountains Preserve, 362 days a year for people to come through our private lands onto what is now the Sand to Snow National Monument. Another piece that's pretty emblematic of the challenges that can face public lands designations are things like cattle leases. So Whitewater Canyon had a 40,000 acre cattle allotment that went all the way through the canyon. And if you can imagine the next time you go to Whitewater, it being filled with, hundreds of cows, it's a very different place than it once was. People had said that the Whitewater River would run black from the cows wallowing in it. So now people are getting back into the San Gorgonio Wilderness in the Coachella Valley. It's very exciting time. Things have changed quite a lot, but in some ways, we still haven't really answered the question, why monuments? We're still having to kind of circle back to that. And one of those issues is that the lands that surround public conservation lands don't always have the same level of protection as those conservation lands do. So what kind of exists around much of these public conservation lands like Wilderness, Mojave National Preserve, San Gorgonio Wilderness, Joshua Tree, are BLM lands, lands that are public and that are open to the public, but they're also kind of considered general use, which means that they're open for different kinds of resource development. And those kinds of lands surround most of these lands, which many people, again, it's another situation that if the issue isn't really being forced, kind of just fades away into the background if nothing really seems to be happening. But if there is some kind of resource that can be developed there, people can lease these lands for really, really cheap, and I'll give you an example of this. So these lava buttes that we were talking about before, that are now inside Sand to Snow National Monument, were previously BLM general use lands. Now, if you'd ever gone to these places, you'd see that there are obvious and numerous Native American cultural sites, including 1,700 known Native American petroglyphs. And that didn't stop the BLM from taking an application for a 4,000-acre wind farm spread across the tops of these features from a foreign energy company. And the cost for the lease was $1 per acre per year. And the BLM carried the application process far enough to let the energy company erect huge towers to measure the wind data. So locals were very, very concerned and had to do their own activism to make sure that the resources that were there were cataloged, and their work carried its way all the way through the process of the Sand to Snow National Monument to have it be included. So this is really kind of a stunning example of the local community having to kind of watchdog what happens on their public lands. This is another view. These are all images taken flying around these features. If anyone wants to visit them, they're just outside of Pioneer Town along Pipes Canyon Road. So this kind of thing started to happen all across the Mojave. And all of these general use BLM lands began to get applications for resource development for alternative energy, solar farms, wind farms, and huge amounts of acreage spread out all across the lands that were protected in the 1994 California Desert Protection Act were now on the table for development. So the Wildlands Conservancy, other stakeholders in the area began to work with Senator Feinstein to make sure that those conservation intentions were not going to be completely undone. So the first round of that was really marked when Senator Feinstein finally introduced legislation that created two new national monuments, Sand to Snow and Mojave Trails. And this is what the boundary of Sand to Snow ended up looking like. And you can see where the boundary goes outside of the areas that were previously San Gorgonio Wilderness. And it's a testament to these kind of places that are public lands that were yet still unprotected, that threaten key wildlife corridors and other areas that once were looked at again were found that development would be a very bad thing for the connectivity of this landscape. That up there is where the lava buttes are that were in the previous images. And right here is where Whitewater Canyon and the Whitewater Preserve is. The other piece that was added into this is also Big Morongo Canyon, which is a spectacular, amazing place that's now inside Sand to Snow National Monument, which is off to the east right here. It's a spectacular place to go watch birds and walk in a really lush riparian area. If you've never been there, it's a wonderful, wonderful place that's made possible by some great people. Here's Mojave Trails, and you can see that it kind of follows this corridor here where Route 66, one of the last pristine sections of Route 66, about 100 miles of it, kind of cuts east and west through here between Ludlow and Needles, and just comes just to the border of the lands that are protected with Mojave National Preserve. This is from Route 66. If anybody's driven this road, they can kind of get a sense of what it must have been like for people who were fleeing the Dust Bowl coming across here to try to find a new life. So the legislation was pretty broadly supported on the local level, but after at least 5 years of it languishing, as President Obama moved towards the end of his term, he used the presidential authority granted to him through the Antiquities Act to protect lands that would also include the Castle Mountains National Monument, which is an area that's about 20,000 acres. Very beautiful place, and it's an important corridor for mountain lions, golden eagles, and bobcats. So now that we've kind of gone through a little bit of the background and covered some of the issues about why the Antiquities Act was necessary to protect the public lands that remained unprotected from the previous conservation designations, let's take a look at some of these places. Mojave Trails, ladies and gentlemen. So before we circle back to some points about access and points of interest in Mojave Trails, there's a few things that I want to say that are particularly relevant to Sand and Snow National Monument. Even the broadest overview of the struggles it took to protect the landscapes inside California's newest national monuments, we can see that these lands were not protected or accessed without community-supported involvement. The decades-long process that went into creating these national monuments is a testament to the fact that, as my colleague David Myers once said, the boundaries that we put around our conservation lands are not in and of themselves inviolate and sacrosanct. What truly protects these lands forever is what's in the hearts and minds of people who love them. And you cannot love what you do not know. 18.5 million people live within a 2-hour drive of Sand and Snow National Monument. 5 million of them are 18 years old or younger. And that's why it's really important for us to be able to support outdoor education wherever we find it, because these are the people who are going to go on and keep protecting these lands. That's been a huge focus of our work on the borders of Sand and Snow National Monument, is to get people out and to offer free outdoor education for children and families. Tens of thousands of them from the Coachella Valley and the Inland Empire. Anyone that gets involved in conservation can tell you that it's tedious, pretty thankless work, and the fact remains that the better you are at it, the more invisible you become. So when you ponder your own involvement in protecting the lands that surround you, I hope you'll remember the next generation will be the beneficiary of your hard work, of your vision, and that this remembrance will put some more fire in your guts to help you continue to carry on. So your next visit to Sand to Snow or Mojave Trails. So Whitewater and Mission Creek are obvious, very easy ways to get into the Sand to Snow National Monument. Mission Creek is accessed right off of Highway 62 at Mission Creek Road. You can hike there, camp there, access is free. Access into Sand to Snow off of Highway 38 is really obvious. It's some of the places that we've all known as a way to get into the mountains, into Sand to Snow National Monument, but previously, obviously, into the San Gorgonio Wilderness. And one of the most kind of iconic places is through Forest Falls. And Forest Falls is where the Vivian Creek Trailhead takes the steep kind of direct route up Mount San Gorgonio. These lava buttes, like I said, are accessed right off of Pipes Canyon Road, just outside of Pioneer Town. Most of the access is on through that area. If you're actually to try to get up to their flanks, is through little dirt roads. None of them really require four-wheel drive, but you should just be careful what you're doing so that you don't get stuck. The Mojave Desert Land Trust has now opened up a trailhead that will take you onto the top of Flat Top Mesa, which is pictured right here. For more kind of detailed information about that, check out Mojave Desert Mojave Desert Land Trust's website. They'll direct you to the best way to do that. One way that I really recommend getting in touch with Mojave Trails is to drive out on Highway 62 to 29 Palms and then drive to Amboy. And when you get to Amboy, you can quickly get to Route 66, and either way that you take on Route 66, whether you're going east or west, will give you kind of a beautiful tour of the mountain ranges that comprise the initial wilderness areas that that Mojave Trails has built on over time. Initially, you'll see the Sheephole Mountains, which are totally amazing, and if you are an intrepid hiker, there's a route to get to the peak, and the view from up there is really good. From the top, you can see all the way to the north side of San Gorgonio, and then off to the side, you can also see San Jacinto, which are these snow-capped pieces on the horizon here. You can also look pretty deep into the monument itself. This is looking just to the kind of northwest of the monument. If you were to turn right on Route 66 and head out more towards Needles, you'll go by the Trilobite Wilderness. And the Trilobite Wilderness is a really obvious feature with big banded cliffs in the mountains, and they're named from the fossilized creatures that you can find there date back 500 million years ago and were among the first life forms to have eyes. If you go to the west, you'll go by the Sleeping Beauty Valley and the Broadwell Dry Lake Bed, and that is named for this kind of silhouette that goes on the horizon on the mountains there that some people think looks like a woman sleeping. And if you have four-wheel drive, you can drive up the Bristol Dry Lake Bed, and you'll also have a really beautiful view of the Bristol Mountains, which are at the edge of this kind of big, broad plain. And if you can get out there on a day like this where there's lots of weather, it's a really, really wonderful place. Afton Canyon is also a really amazing place that is unlike anywhere in the Mojave that I've ever been. There's a wonderful riparian area there where the Mojave River runs through it, and it has painted hills that are unlike anywhere else you'll see in the Mojave. The BLM just recently kind of updated the campground facilities there, and they're virtually brand new, so it's a nice place to go camp and explore. I have to admit that because we pushed so hard for so long for the initial national monuments that were inside Senator Feinstein's bill, we didn't really get much time to go inside the Castle Mountains, which were added at the kind of very end. And the people who were most involved in that were the National Parks Conservation Association. So they have really great information on Castle Mountains. Castle Mountains is a piece, about 20,000 acres, that is inside Mojave National Preserve. There was a gold mine there that had a permit to pull out, I think, some pretty large amount of gold that they eventually stopped doing because the price of gold fell to a point where it really wasn't worth it to them. So they have a permit to pull gold from there, I think, till 2025. But it's an amazing, amazing place, and I wish I could tell you more about it specifically, but like I said, if you contact the the National Parks Conservation Association, they are some of the most knowledgeable people about that because they were right at the forefront of getting it added to this designation. So that concludes the slideshow. Thank you all very much.